Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest TMA virtual briefing of 2025, where we will be discussing the latest action in Springfield and how legislation moving through the Illinois Senate could impact small and mid-sized manufacturers. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's government affairs consultant. I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA state lobbyist David Curran, as well as a very special guest, Senate Republican leader John Curran of Downers Grove. Good morning, David and Leader Curran.
Morning, Rich.
Morning.
Thanks for being here. We're going to spend the next half hour discussing the latest legislative action in the Illinois Senate as the spring session nears its end next month and its potential impact on TMA members. At the end of the program, TMA members will have an opportunity to ask written questions of Leader Curran by typing them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. Now we'll turn it over to TMA state lobbyist David Curran, who will introduce our special guest and get his thoughts on the legislative session today. The floor is yours, David.
Good morning, Leader.
Morning, David.
Hey, thanks for joining us, especially at this important time during session. There's only a month and a half left to go. How's the session going so far, in your opinion?
Well, I think, and you're down there all the time, David. It got off to a slow start, but certainly I think conversation centered around the fiscal health of the state at a bigger tone and pace when the governor did released his recommended budget with his budget address and state of the state. And appropriation committees have been busy breaking that apart right now as really the last 2 weeks, the pace has really picked up. We've had a lot of both the House and the Senate, a lot of bills debated on the floor, voted on the floor, and we've gotten to see how some things have not quite made it through the system. And thankfully, because there's a lot of bad legislation filed, and it looks like we're going to be successful in defeating some measures and keeping them from coming to the Senate for a full vote.
That's good. Well, I know the budget's being worked on behind closed doors, or at least a lot of it is. How would you characterize budget talks and the information you're able to glean about the budget? Is there anything that you can share?
Well, I would say right now the appropriation committees are, and those meetings are public.
Yeah.
They're almost done, going department by department. That work is still being done this week. In fact, I want to say we were tied up all day yesterday in appropriation hearings. So you really need that to get done first. That, having departments account for their spending, their initiatives, what directions they want to take their department in the upcoming year. Once that process wraps up, which will be very soon, we'll also get an updated revenue projections late April, early May. And at that point, I think that's really when, in terms of size and scope of the budget, those discussions really start to intensify. And yes, you're right. Some of those discussions are behind closed doors, but ultimately, we are looking forward to some productive conversations.
Okay. Is there anything pertaining to our small and mid-sized manufacturers that you can talk about pertaining to the budget right now, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess with the budget, the biggest issue for small and mid-sized manufacturers to keep an eye on is taxes and fees.
Right.
The governor has departed from his recent trend of proposing a budget that included tax increases. Sometimes he would argue when we had in law to sunset the franchise tax, and they reversed course on that, or net operating loss, getting rid of that cap that was put in place during COVID by Governor Pritzker and the majority Democrats. That was due to fall off, extending that cap preventing businesses from writing off their loss. Those type of proposals are remarkably absent this year. New ones, they still have the cap and the net operating loss, but new ones this year in his budget address. And I thought the governor came in with a more constrained approach, even though it is record spending. It is it's the biggest budget in the history of the state is what he's proposed. But we saw immediate backlash from Democrats in both the House and the Senate, some of these sub caucuses that wanted increased spending and were not happy with the $2 billion increase in spending that the governor proposed year over year. And we're looking for more. So the only more is going to be tax increases. That's the only way you get there. So that is really probably the biggest issue I think small and mid-sized manufacturers should be looking at.
Okay. Okay. What do you think the budget will be done by May 31st? There's some question as to whether they'll have all the numbers or be able to have a budget by May 31st, or maybe come back in special session and deal with some extra matters. But
there's always uncertainty that the budget will be done by May 31st. I think we saw last year a remarkable display of not bringing it to a conclusion in the House. But I find it hard to believe when one party has the executive branch and supermajorities in the House and the Senate that they won't resolve the budget issues by May 31st. So I would anticipate that it will be. I'm sure it won't be pretty how they get there, but I would anticipate it will be done.
Okay.
And you do bring up a good point. There has been talk. The governor has floated this idea about, based upon actions, reduction in federal dollars flowing to states, specifically Illinois. He may call for a special session over the summer or in the fall to adjust items in the budget as in response. So there is certainly, I think, more of the possibility that we would come back and revisit the budget after that process is concluded in May.
Okay. Well, our small and mid-sized manufacturers have a lot of concern regarding the cost of their utility bills and the availability of power. And I just kind of was wondering your general opinion on that issue, where we are in the state on supplying energy and power. And then I'll ask you more specifically about maybe an energy package if it's coming this session. How are we standing in the way of availability of power and keeping our costs?
David, that's really one of the most remarkable topics in my time in the General Assembly. When I first started serving in 2017, Illinois was a net exporter of power back then. And one of the, we had public policy issues that we still have centered around taxation and regulation that constrain and hurt business and job growth in this state. But one of the strong pluses that Illinois had was an abundance of affordable energy, reliable, affordable energy grid that attracted businesses to Illinois or manufacturers, and kind of partially along with being the center of the country and the transportation hub and access to an abundance of clean drinking water. Those issues kind of partially offset some of the bad public policy we had in place. We have declined significantly in the energy scape in that time. When you look at increases have been dramatic for Illinois businesses and residents. And, there is a lot of questions centered around availability and reliability going forward. As Illinois has pulled electric or a generation off the grid, and the replacement generation of clean energy has been very slow to materialize. I think that is definitely an issue that not only this session, but for the foreseeable future is going to be a year in and year out, significant issue to keep an eye on.
Okay. Well, what's the, we hear there might be an energy package, which will include some legislation, maybe focusing on some nuclear power. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, right now there are talks centered around a energy package, as you said. One component of it is but this is more long term, and part of that energy package will also contain short term, but long term play is increasing the use of nuclear in the state of Illinois. We for the small modulars, single generation nuclear, that cap was lifted, but looking to lift the cap on all nuclear development in Illinois. So that's something our deputy leader Sue Resin has been leading on. Not only for Senate Republicans, but she's someone that has, been very vested in that nuclear space. Conversations have been very productive, especially with the governor in that regard. And we have a month and a half to go, but the hope is that we're going to get an energy package that is going to start to move Illinois in a direction that we're going to be able to address these future energy needs. Because when you look at these future energy needs in the day and age of AI and data centers, the president trying to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. These are huge consumers of energy. Illinois wants to be in the middle of all that activity, and to do so, we have got to address some of the energy deficiencies that with this state that have developed recently.
Well, just on that, would it be fair to say though? So, would it be fair to say that we, as a state, we ran off to the green energy at such a clip and we closed down all the other energy sources that we were, not all, but at a faster rate, we closed down the energy sources that we did have, and that kind of put us in this pickle.
We pulled a lot of coal off the energy grid, right? We delayed and put roadblocks in place on further natural gas expansion. And that has had a detrimental effect. It is certainly self-inflicted. At the same time, the robust demand increases that are here for the foreseeable future were not properly identified 7-8 years ago. And, so this has been a kind of an intersection of, I think we didn't foresee the massive increased demand on the horizon and some poor planning on the state's part.
Yeah. Well, I'll go one more question here and then we can turn it over to Rich. As you know, House Bill 3762 is a House bill that did not pass out of the House by the April 11th deadline. And Senate Bill 1976 was also a Senate bill that did not pass by the April 11th deadline. But these bills are kind of still alive, or at least one of them is. But for many TMA members, these were kind of the two terrible bills. And they're remarkable in the sense that what they do, the House bill attempts to put all federal labor rules and regulations that existed on January 19th, the day before President Trump was inaugurated. It attempts to make all those rules and regs put into state law. And then the other bill, Senate Bill 1976, attempts to put onerous regulations on all employers if the temperature outside or inside is below 40 degrees and above 80. Actually, I switched those two around. So, but those are what the two bills do. Do either of these have a chance of being heard from again before May 31st, do you think?
Well, the Senate Bill 1976, which is actually that's what they would call Trump proofing Illinois on worker rights and worker safety.
Yeah.
And they get to title their bills as they see fit when they file them. But that bill is the deadline was extended to May 9th. It has not gotten a lot of momentum though in the Senate. So my hope is even with an extended deadline that we're not going to see that come forward. But I would caution, I remember the first Trump administration when he took office, the Senate passed a similar bill, similar in concept, around environmental regulations. And at the time, they didn't call it Trump-proofing Illinois. Thankfully, it didn't go anywhere in the House, but it was that same concept of no matter what changes the federal government makes, we're not even going to take a look at whether it's good or bad. We're just going to reject it whole cloth before we even see it, before we even evaluate it, before we even are able to debate it and make a determination whether or not it's good public policy and ultimately good for the people of Illinois. And that is it's just a dereliction of duty. It's basically saying, I don't want to do my job. Hopefully it doesn't get there. I think this is there was a lot of ginned up noise about having the Trump-proof Illinois, and I mean, let's face it, what have we really seen? I mean, I think there are budgetary issues to monitor, but beyond that, this has kind of just been a lot of partisan political rhetoric. And so my hope is that we're not going to see that come forward.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll turn it back over to Rich, and he might have a few questions from our members that have typed in the chat box while we've been talking. So.
Thanks, David. Now it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. For those of you on your computers, or if you're using the mobile app, you can type your question and submit it through the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel, and I'll read the questions and ask Leader Curran to answer them. In the meantime, I'll ask Leader Curran the first question that was pre-submitted by a TMA member. Question is, this is Senator on potential tax hikes again. Leader Curran, you were talking about what we have to be most concerned about, potential tax hikes to make up for the budget shortfall. Are there any specific tax hikes you think they might be considering this year, specifically that might impact small businesses? Leader Curran?
There has not been there's not been a lot of talk around what tax hikes they may turn to. I want to say this discussion highlights why it was so important to defeat the progressive income tax constitutional amendment that they proposed. Because could you imagine if they had the ability to just adjust income taxation rates on a year in and year out basis, and not do it flat across the board, but do it in a targeted manner and target certain groups of people? That would be happening every year. The one tax, this has more to do with public transit that has been floated that would be a big concern, would be expansion of sales tax statewide. And that would expanding the sales tax, pulling in different services into it, not necessarily maybe on point with the manufacturing community, but it would certainly have a downstream effect with a lot of your customers, which would be a big issue.
Thanks, Leader Curran. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please type your question on the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. All right, this is kind of a follow-up to what you just mentioned. The potential return of the progressive tax. Former Governor Pat Quinn, the Chicago Teachers Union, and others in Springfield were talking about this a few months ago, I think, following the successful advisory referendum that took place in November. Leader Curran, do you think there's some talk that it may come back in 2026 on the November ballot? Are you hearing anything about this? Do you think it's possible that it could come back?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there's still time. There's still plenty of time to put it on the ballot, but I have not heard talk centered around that. If you were going to set that up, I would imagine it would be you wouldn't do it when you have all your statewide elected officers up for election in 2026, and it would be something that would be more likely to be run in a presidential election, would be my belief, and that was the same election cycle they chose the last time. Was what I believe, right, was a presidential election cycle. So, so that's what I would give me a little comfort that may not 2026. Do I ultimately think it would be brought up again? Absolutely.
Great, thanks, Senator Curran. All right, we do have a question coming in from a TMA member. The question is, recently Senator Stottleman was quoted in Locator magazine saying that Illinois is a pro-business state. I was thinking the manufacturing community would not agree. Any thoughts, Leader Curran?
When we take a look at all the economic measuring indicators, when we think about Illinois competing against the 49 other states in this country, we consistently rank somewhere between 44 or 45 and 50 in basically every measuring category that you would want to you point to measure your success. Unemployment, we're around 46. GDP growth, we were 48th over the past, I think, since 2018. So it is. So I would dispute that. The reality is, when we look at how we compete versus other states in this country, we compete very poorly in terms of business climate. And it is centered around public policy. It is not. We have so much going for us. I have such strong belief in Illinois' potential, long-term potential. We've got to correct the public policy aspect.
Thanks, Senator Curran. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question under the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. All right, we have another question submitted from a TMA member. The question is, since the Democrats took over Illinois' government, they have pushed through significant anti-business legislation that puts Illinois manufacturers at a disadvantage with our competitors in neighboring states. Other than potential tax hikes, what should TMA members be concerned about most from the governor and legislators this legislative session? Leader
We haven't seen anything in the workers' compensation space this year, but that is something to always keep an eye on, and that is something that can materialize rather quickly. And I know that is a huge concern to manufacturers all throughout this state. There were some reforms under when Governor Rauner was in office, and we haven't seen peel back of those, but that is certainly an area of great concern. And then it is really just the drip, drip, drip of regulation. We constantly see these ideas, and it's a day off for this, a day off for that, an additional notice you have to give, additional potential liability, opening up to private causes of action for really just kind of administrative failure to follow certain administrative processes in the workplace. That's the constant flow. And when you debate them, it's always, hey, this shouldn't be a big deal, and but this is going to help these group of workers. But when you take it all in totality, it is an abundance of distraction and cost to employers all around this state, and so that is part of the arc that we've got to turn around and really start stripping some of this back out of law.
Thanks, Senator Curran. All right, let's see. Hold on. If we have any more questions.
If
All
we
right, I think we
don't,
have-
I do have a couple, things I would love to bring up that I have not talked about.
Sure. We have one more question
Oh,
from a
let's get the
TMA member,
question.
and then we'll go to you. Okay. So the question is, there are many organizations working through workforce development initiatives to prepare workers for the needs of employers, but employers seem to continue to balk at hiring. Are there any incentives for employers to participate in these workforce development programs? Peter Curran?
Well, I mean, we certainly need to make sure that the next generation of employees are there and have the skill sets that we need. I mean, that is something I hear constantly from manufacturers in my district is the constant concern about workforce and workforce availability. Workforce development in concept is trying to bridge that gap. I can't say whether or not it's particularly right in whoever asked the question's instance, but globally, Illinois has to continue to do a better job on workforce development.
Great. Thanks, Senator Curran. All right, we have no more questions. So at this point, we were going to ask you if you had any closing thoughts. So why don't you go ahead and share with us what you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to put two more bills on your radar screen. Radar screen. One is Senate Bill 164, and that is prevailing wage, extending prevailing wage to federal construction projects. So while maybe not in particular to the group here, it is certainly has the potential, if passed, to drive up costs, or more importantly, may turn the federal administration off from investing in Illinois, which would be a big concern as well. And then Senate Bill, this is big for the manufacturers, Senate Bill 1531, so styrofoam container ban. I do expect this bill to come forward in the Senate for a vote. Was not quite there yet, but it is extended, and it prohibits the sale or distribution of disposable food service containers composed in whole or in part by polystyrene foam beginning January 1, 2030, and sets penalties on that. And certainly that is going to have certainly an effect on jobs. That's going to lead to job loss in Illinois, and it's certainly going to have an effect on the manufacturing sector, especially any of those in one of the related spaces there. So certainly wanted to just highlight both of those.
Great. Thanks so much, Leader Curran. All right, well, that will do it for today's virtual briefing. I want to thank Senate Republican Leader John Curran of Downers Grove for joining us today, along with TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin for leading a wonderful discussion. And of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took the time out of their day to join us today. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader.